You are in cruise. All systems are restored and operating normally. The center and the trim tanks have been emptied. We are now going to study the failure of the fuel transfer from the outer to the inner tanks. Click on the forward arrow to activate the failure. On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM caution, outer to inner fault, appears amber, meaning that automatic transfer from outer tanks to inner tanks has failed. Notice that the ECAM fuel page is automatically called. Notice the corresponding indications. On the ECAM fuel page, two plain amber triangles appear, meaning that the outer to inner tanks transfer has failed. And on the fuel control panel, the fault light is illuminated amber on the outer tank transfer push-button switch. The pilot flying will ask you to perform the ECAM actions. Perform ECAM action. On the outer tank transfer push-button switch, the amber fault light disappears and is replaced by the white on light, meaning that the outer to inner transfer valves are controlled open. Note, the outer tank transfer push-button switch controls both transfer valves simultaneously. On the ECAM fuel page, the outer to inner transfer valves appear in full green, indicating that a manual transfer has been selected. Note, if the center tank is not empty, the center tank pumps must be selected off to avoid inadvertent fuel transfer from the center to the outer tanks. The fuel system is analyzed. After review and confirmation from the pilot flying, clear fuel. On the engine warning display, the memo Outer Tank Transfer appears green as a transfer from the outer to the inner tanks is in progress. ECAM action completed. You are still in cruise. The outer tanks are now empty, shown by the ECAM memo message Outer Tank Transferred, displayed in green. Click on the forward arrow to continue the procedure. On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM caution, Man Transfer Completed, appears amber, meaning that the manual outer to inner tanks transfer is completed. The ECAM fuel page is automatically called. You can notice that the outer tanks are empty. The pilot flying will ask you to perform the ECAM actions. Perform ECAM action. On the fuel control panel, the outer tank transfer push-button switch extinguishes, meaning that the manual transfer has been stopped. On the ECAM fuel page, the green arrows in the outer tanks have disappeared, indicating that the transfer valves are closed. The abnormal procedure is complete. The fuel system is analyzed. After review and confirmation from the pilot flying, clear fuel. ECAM action completed. We learn from the ECAM actions and indications associated with the outer to inner tanks fuel transfer failure that fuel transfer from outer to inner tanks can be manually selected through the outer tank transfer push-button switch. When the outer tank transfer push-button switch is selected on, both transfer valves are controlled open until the outer tank transfer push-button switch is set to auto. We will continue this module by presenting the jettison system. This system allows the crew to jettison some of the aircraft fuel in flight. The fuel dumping rate is approximately 1,000 kilograms per minute. You are in flight just after takeoff, when an emergency suddenly occurs, which requires you to land as soon as possible. Click on the forward arrow to activate the emergency configuration. A green plus blue low pressure has occurred, which requires you to land as soon as possible. A jettison operation must be carried out since the aircraft weight exceeds the maximum landing weight. For training purposes, we have called the ECAM fuel page for you. Please select the Fuel Prediction key on the MCDU. On the MCDU Fuel Prediction page, a jettison gross weight has to be inserted. We have entered 180 tons in the scratch pad for you. This value is below the maximum landing weight. Please insert this value in the dedicated field. No, press the Line Select key. The jettison gross weight is now inserted in the MCDU. To start the jettison operation, you will have to arm and then to activate the corresponding push-button switches. First, lift the arm push-button switch guard and set the push-button switch to on. Then, lift the active push-button switch guard and set the push-button switch to on. When the active push-button switch is set to on, observe that on the ECAM fuel page, the jettison valves open as shown by the corresponding indications, with the green open light on the panel when the valves are fully open, and the jettison memo on the engine warning display. Notice also that all the standby fuel pumps automatically start to operate, and all the crossfeed valves automatically open with the corresponding memo on the engine warning display. Click on the forward arrow and monitor the ECAM fuel page and the MCDU. Fuel is jettisoned simultaneously from the center tank using the center tank pumps and from the inner tanks using all fuel pumps. As the trim tank is not empty, a forward transfer also occurs. Click on the forward arrow to jettison the remaining fuel and observe what happens on the ECAM fuel page. As the gross weight reaches the predicted value pre-selected in the FMGES, the jettison normally stops automatically, but a failure has been detected. On the engine warning display, read the title of the failure. The ECAM caution, jettison not closed, appears amber, meaning that the jettison valve is jammed open. On the ECAM fuel page, the corresponding jettison indication and the arrow are displayed in amber. On the fuel panel, the fault lights are illuminated on the center tank push-button switches. The pilot flying will ask you to perform the ECAM actions. Perform ECAM action. As you can read on the engine warning display, if the jettison is confirmed, you will have to switch off the center tank pumps. In case of gravity transfer from the center to the inner tanks, 15 tons of fuel remain unusable. Therefore, the 590 kilograms in the center tank are lost. We will stop the exercise here. We will finish this module by presenting some other abnormal indications that you can have on the ECAM fuel page due to failure of both fuel control and monitoring computers, FCMCs. Click on the forward arrow to display the failure. On the engine warning display, the ECAM caution FCMC 1+2 fault appears amber, meaning that both FCMCs have failed. There are no fuel control and monitoring computers signals received by the ECAM. All the related indications are replaced by 2 amber crosses. Now, let's see some other abnormal indications that you can have on the ECAM fuel page. In certain circumstances, you can have a trim tank transfer failure. In that case, 2 amber arrows appear on the ECAM page, meaning that the automatic center of gravity control is lost. After having selected manually the forward transfer through the fuel panel, the left and right forward transfer amber arrows disappear and are replaced by an arrow from the trim to the center tank. This arrow is displayed filled green, indicating that a manual forward transfer is in progress. Note, a manual forward transfer is only possible from the trim tank to the center tank and is done by gravity. The center tank fuel quantity and the fuel on board are partially boxed amber, meaning that part of the fuel is unusable. These indications will disappear as soon as the center tank pumps operate. On the engine warning display, the memo Trim Tank Transfer is displayed green because a trim tank forward transfer is in progress. Once the trim tank is empty, the trim tank transferred memo message is displayed. In some cases, you will have to use the trim tank feed selector either to completely isolate the trim tank or to manually force the forward transfer. Click on the forward arrow to see other abnormal indications. On the engine warning display, the fuel on board indication is displayed with 2 amber dashes across the 2 last digits in case of degraded accuracy. Select the ECAM fuel page on the ECP to determine which tank is affected. You can see that the affected tank is the left inner tank. The 2 amber dashes indicate a loss of accuracy of the indicated fuel quantity.